Okay, we're coming to the end of the fifth chapter of the Shmone Prakim. We talked about everything that you do should be aimed at one goal and only one goal, and that is to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that includes your speech and your physical needs, and you have responsibility for your emotional well-being, and you should be prepared to invest resources, time and effort and money in your emotional well-being, just as your physical well-being, because all of them contribute to the ability to come to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he ends the chapter with the following paragraph. You should know, he says, that this is a very difficult commitment and organization of life to achieve. Only a few will succeed in achieving it, and only after great effort, which means achieving it completely, living totally organized life where every action is calculated only in terms of its effect on bringing about that ultimate goal. And he says, if I would find a person who is on that level, I would think that he was not less than the prophets. Now, you have to understand that being like a prophet is a two-dimensional matter for the Rambam. First of all, as he's going to talk in a later chapter about the conditions that are necessary to become a prophet, one thing is your preparation for receiving prophecy. That's what you can do. But the fact that a person succeeds in preparing himself for prophecy is no guarantee that he'll have prophecy. That's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which he delivers when HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels, obviously, that it's the best for all concerned. So when he talks about the level of the prophet, he can mean, on the one hand, you've done everything that anybody needs to do in order to merit prophecy, or he could mean, you've actually had prophecy. And here he means the former. He's not talking about whether HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to him or not. If a person leads the life that's organized in this ideal way that I have described, then he has done everything that anybody needs to do in order to be worthy of prophecy. But that doesn't guarantee that he'll be a prophet. In particular, the tradition tells us that from the end of the Babylonian exile until the Messiah comes, there won't be any prophecy. And that doesn't mean that no one can achieve this organization of life. So here we're talking about he'll be equal to anyone who has completed the preparations for prophecy. Yeah.
Can there be cases in which there's prophecy without feeling the conditions? Like there was certain thing that Hashem wanted to transmit?
I'll tell you, if you read the verses simply, it sounds like there are such cases, because the verses speak as if Bilam was a prophet, and they say things about Lavan as if he was a prophet. But the Rambam is quite clear in his chapters on prophecy at the end of the part 2 of the guide that that's pseudo-prophecy. It's not real prophecy, because he says you have to have the preconditions. So it's something that's like prophecy and imitates prophecy and low-level inspirations of Islam, but it's not real prophecy. It's not real prophecy. So if according to the Rambam, yes, you have to fulfill the conditions. No such thing as having it without fulfilling the conditions. Now, and the Rambam explains it right away. Kolomar. By the way, the word kolomar in Hebrew means the words that I've just spoken to you have to be thought about very carefully because they have a meaning that you won't guess. That's what kolomar means. It means it has to be paraphrased in a way that reveals its true meaning. That he is organizing all the powers of his soul and establishes for them the purpose, knowing Hashem. And there's no action, neither great or small. And he doesn't even say a word unless that action and that word will bring him to this great purpose that I've been talking to you about. Maybe it brings you to an intermediary level. It gives you a certain quality of character or quality of mind, which then eventually will lead to that goal. And he says that he does this through an examination. In other words, you can imagine people who naturally have certain character traits, which they receive from their parents or they received from their society. He's not taking that really into account. He's saying that this is a matter of constantly evaluating where you are, what your conditions are, what this action will do in terms of its impact on you, in addition to the impact of others around you. And he sees whether this action will fulfill that purpose. And if he does, it will. If it will, he does it. If not, he doesn't do it. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires of us. And this is what it means. And what it says, V'yahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha. Now, this is sort of breathtaking. This is the Shema. Love HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all your heart and with all your soul. I don't know. I could think of 10 different ways of explaining these words. The one that the Rambam is using here is not obviously the only or the right way to understand the words. He's taking it to mean your whole heart, your whole soul are dedicated to the purpose of coming to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's all. Yeah. When it says your soul, it means all the parts of your soul. And now he says that the purpose of it all is to love Hashem. To love Hashem. Didn't say that before. The whole time he was talking about knowing Hashem. Put that on the table for the moment. And now he says, we have from the prophets an expression that describes this idea. B'chol drachecha da'ehu. In all your ways, you should know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, that also, linguistically, there's only 3 words in Hebrew. Linguistically, you can read it in a number of different ways. One way of reading it is, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, whatever your condition is, have HaKadosh Baruch Hu in mind. Or, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, try to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in what you're doing. Or, whatever you do it in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being there with you in what you do. None of those says what the Rambam is saying. He's saying, use all your ways to know Him. Now, while you're in your ways, you should have knowledge of Him. No, use your ways. Everything you're engaged in, use to come to know Him. That's the way he's reading those words. Now, of course, when I say that, I mean, the words can be read that way. That's certainly a way to read them, and that's the way the Rambam is reading them, to express his principle. Kolomar, that is to say, that you should establish the action for this goal in reality. Just 1 second. Shin base is something funny about the text here. In other words, the purpose of the action should be to get to the MS, which is knowing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Alpha P. I don't know what the next words mean. I'm going to leave them out for now. And the Chachamim made that's a statement in Mishlei, in Proverbs, which comes from Solomon. And they said it in their beautiful, profound, short language, and they managed to encompass this entire idea. when you look at the brevity of their words, how they express this entire idea, it's astonishing. And he says this over and over again. He says it in the Mordechai also a number of times. His astonishment at the ability of the Talmudical sages to express profound and extensive ideas in very short formulas. And he says that their ability to do so is a koach eloki. It's a divine power, without any question. And this is what they say in Pirkei Avos: "V'chol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim." All your actions should be for the sake of heaven. That's what I wanted to explain to you in this chapter, he says. So now, above he put in the pasuk from Shema that you should love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we didn't speak about love here. We spoke about knowing Him. So I want to read you a passage from the. I want to read you a passage from the. I left my phone upstairs.
You got it.
No, the office is locked. Should I just tell you? I'll tell it to you about that. In the guide, in part 3, chapter 51, he describes what he calls the ideal avoda, which some other translate as worship, of God. And he says something more than he says here, and he has a much richer context. And he uses the same verse. You shall love Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul. And he says like this: the first level of getting to the service of God is knowledge of God. That's a precondition for serving God. It's not the service itself. Here in this chapter, it sounds like the whole goal is to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think that if we take it with those words, then it's incomplete. In terms of what he says in the Mordechai. He says, and when you come to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that will lead to love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says that's another precondition. That's not the worship. That's not the service. And he proves it from the beginning of the second paragraph of the Shema. If you listen to my words, to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the next word is ula'avdo, and to serve him. So the Rambam says clearly the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes after loving him. It's to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu and serve him. The service is not identical to the love, and it comes after the love. So knowledge enables you to achieve love, and he says in the Mishnah Torah that we've said several times that your love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes according to your knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'll explain that in a moment. And both of them are preconditions for serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then he says, when a person meditates on this knowledge that he has, and he rejoices in it, he has simcha from it, and that leads him to mentally focus on the Kodesh Baruch Hu, to be conscious of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, to be related in his mind to a Kodesh Baruch Hu all the time. That's the ideal worship of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's the conscious connection. We have a word for that in our language. It's called dveikus. That's what dveikus is. And then he goes on in chapter 32 it's 351. And he goes on in 52 to explain how that deals with tzadik varalo, suffering and everything else. But that's the ideal service of Kodesh Baruch Hu. And he says clearly that a person who has the knowledge of Kodesh Baruch Hu and doesn't engage in constant meditation on Kodesh Baruch Hu isn't worshiping Kodesh Baruch Hu. He isn't. That's not the worship. So the idea that knowing Kodesh Baruch Hu is the end of the line, according to that, those chapters in the guide, is not correct. It's desperately incorrect. The end of the line is dveikus. And he has a whole discussion. What happens to a person who knows the Kodesh Baruch Hu? By the way, knowing is passive. You know, while you're asleep, you still know that Washington is the capital of America. You didn't forget it. Somebody wake you up and say, what's the capital? You know it's Washington. When you're not thinking about it, doesn't mean you don't know it. Knowledge is dispositional, as the philosophers say. Knowledge is the ability to use or recall the fact when necessary. It's not what you're thinking about all the time. You know a lot more than what you're thinking about at this moment. Do you know your address? Yeah, you know it. You just weren't thinking about it. You didn't forget it when you weren't thinking about it. So he says there's a person who knows and was focused and then continues to know and loses the focus. There's certain consequences for losing the focus. So the knowledge isn't it. The knowledge isn't it. He's not a philosopher. He's what we would call a religious person. Surprise, surprise. Maimonides, a religious person. How could that be? How could he be a philosopher and a religious person? I mean, the whole world of so-called scholarship is just so off beat here, off the track here. So I'm putting that in because here in this chapter, he spoke about knowing Kodesh Baruch Hu several times and saying that was the goal. Now here, the very last paragraph I just read to you, he put in loving a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Well, that isn't knowing. Knowing and loving aren't the same thing. But as he says in the Mor Nevuchim, the knowledge leads to love. Oh, that's the next step on the ladder. And in the Mor Nevuchim, he tells you the step beyond both of those is Dveikus. And Dveikus is the ideal worship of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Yes?
Could it be understood then that when one puts HaKadosh Baruch Hu before everything that they think and everything that they say and everything that they do, that is that end of the line of Dveikus, that everything then is informed by this recall of knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so all one's speech and all one's doings are then better for it, and that leads to increased love as well as one goes through life.
I don't know. You said a few things, and I don't think they're all the same.
Okay.
The way you put it at the beginning, the way you put it at the end didn't sound the same to me.
Let me narrow it down.
Yeah.
Is the end of the line of Dveikus to have Hashem come before your thoughts, become before your speech, and to become before your actions, and for not to be inconsistent, maybe in the morning, but not in the afternoon, but for to come from the start of the day?
That's not enough.
Yes.
That's not enough. That's not enough. Just to have, because Baruch Hu is your top priority, so that each time you come to do something, you think, what would Kodesh Baruch Hu want? Isn't enough.
Okay.
And he illustrates this. He says, a person who has Dveikus or seeks Dveikus, one of the most precious times of the day. Now think, when would there be a precious time during the day? I know, when you're davening in the morning, you're saying Kedusha. Or when you're learning with your Rabbi and you're getting new insights to his Torah. No, those aren't the precious times in the day. The precious time of the day is when you're on your bed at night, just before you fall asleep.
Yes.
Why is that? Why is that such a precious time? Because since the day is over, if you're a normal person, you can say, okay, the day's over. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do for an hour from now. An hour from now, I'm going to be asleep. So you can meditate on Kodesh Baruch Hu uninterruptedly. You can just think about Kodesh Baruch Hu. Just be in his presence. Just experience his being. Right? So you're not deciding anything. This isn't priorities. This isn't a question of choosing. It's just being together with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's all.
Yeah.
That's the condition that has to be consistent. Of course, when you have that and you're making a decision, you're going to think about what a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants. But it's not that. You made it too much on the active side and the mechanical side.
Yes.
It's an experiential thing. Yeah.
And that also leads to an increased love, because at that level, then it's you're with Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at any given moment, and there isn't
he doesn't describe it as progressive in that way. It might be true. He doesn't deny
you're
it.
looking for an escape, so to speak. So you're not, isn't that, you see this with people often. There's like a room full of silence, and you can bask in it, and then suddenly people are breaking the silence, but you enjoy the silence because of that connection.
Yeah, that's what the Rambam is saying. It's certainly a person would not be looking for an escape.
Yeah.
I mean, if you happen to like classical music and you're listening to the climax of the fourth movement of the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, you don't long for an escape. You just don't want to be disturbed.
Yes.
I hope the phone won't ring. I want to get to the end. This is so thrilling, so exciting, and so gripping that you don't want anything else to happen.
Yeah.
It's a feeling like that.
Yeah.
We're just, like he says in the 10th chapter of the Laws of Tshuva, anything that causes a rupture in that connection is something that you feel is a tragedy.
Yes.
because you want to be together with the Kodesh Baruch Hu continuously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask from
Yeah.
on how delicate is this connection and learning it, like when Yaakov Avinu was for a really long period of time, like in a depression from what happened with Yosef, and like he was like for a real, like I think there's like some sort of inherent mechadesh ingredient into the.
You're asking an interesting question, but I think we have to be very careful now, because we're not talking about prophecy now.
No.
We're not talking about prophecy. We're talking about dveikus. Dveikus and prophecy aren't the same thing. The condition of prophecy that you have to have a certain state of joy, and when Jacob was mourning for Joseph because he thought he was dead, so it says for 20 years he didn't have prophecy, it doesn't follow that he didn't have dveikus. That doesn't follow. I think according to the Rambam, dveikus would be available under all conditions. However, maybe not for Jacob, because the Rambam, we're going to see, he thinks that Jacob, the Rambam says that your character traits are an important precondition for prophecy, but it can't be required that the character traits be perfect, because Jacob failed in his character traits, and Moses failed in his character traits. So it can't be required that they be perfect. When Jacob was afraid, when he was going to Esau, the Rambam says it was a failure. He shouldn't have been afraid. Someone who's in faith with the Kodesh Baruch Hu will not be afraid. Mm. So there are certain conditions which could interfere, but it's not. Let me try to put it this way: it's not that your conditions make it impossible for you to have dveikus. These conditions are conditions of testing, and you respond to them. And you could respond to them by maintaining your dveikus. You could do that, or you could fail to maintain your dveikus. Nothing in the conditions forces you to lose the dveikus. And he thinks of dveikus being continual. I mean, Avram Avinu had his ups and downs, and he credits him as being one of the, and Moses also had his ups and downs. And he credits them, these people, as having been continuously in dveikus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's something which can carry you through all conditions of life if you exercise yourself in such a way to attach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in those conditions. That's what he's talking about. He said, I think he's no less than the prophets. Yeah.
Would it be on the right path to say that one can increase their sensitivity to their dveikus with their decision making, and when they have that increased sensitivity to that idea of dveikus, or that concept of dveikus, that's when they want to daven more, that's when they want to study more Torah, because even though they're increasing their connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and they're engaging in these activities, once they develop a certain sensitivity, they want to continue engaging more and more so in these activities, because they can actually have a literal sense that they're being drawn closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through these activities.
Well, I'm going to comment on the type of question you're asking. Okay. The Rambam has defined a concept, and now you're taking that concept and applying it to life as you live it, and life as you observe it, and you're saying, seems to me that these and these ideas will fit together with his concept.
I'm actually asking, I'm not sure.
I know you're asking. But my point is that that sort of reflection has a certain fragility, because the Rambam himself should tell us what it is that will produce that condition. Yeah. And he does, but he doesn't mention what you're talking about.
Okay.
So you have to be very cautious in doing that. He said, I quoted before a few moments ago, he said that the first step is having knowledge, and knowledge leads to love, and then the joy he has in the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that joy propels him into this condition of dveikus. Doesn't say when I do an action I feel he's with me, is all that. None of that is there.
So that actually answers the question. So the idea is you will come to love your davening more when you actually invest in trying to understand Hashem more and more so. And so what he's saying is the increased knowledge will lead to that increased love, and that you can maybe
the knowledge leads to love, and the two of them lead to the joy of the knowledge, and that joy leads to the dveikus. That's the procedure. Now, I said before that the Rambam says several places that knowledge, love is according to knowledge, and although I don't know of anywhere where he explains it in detail, but there is a certain, I would say, intuitive idea behind this. You can't love an unknown. You can be afraid of an unknown, but you can't love an unknown. Love requires identification. Love requires sharing. Love requires participation. So, you know very well that there are ideologies that say you should love everyone. But a normal person thinks, love him? I have no clue who he is. Why should I love him? If I knew who he was, knew his character, knew his ideals, knew his activities, then maybe I could love him. But in the meantime, and there are certain people whose activities and so forth and so on are very hard to love. So then the answer is, you love the godliness that's in him. Okay, that you could certainly do, but that's not loving him. Because he's more than the godliness in him. There's his character, his activities, and his priorities, and his perceptions, and his judgments, and then it becomes very thin, We wouldn't talk about loving him that way. So now, if you say, there is a being that created the world, because of the Big Bang, and there's got to be something behind it, something's behind it. Good. Love it. Why did it create the world? Is it still connected to the world? Does it have a purpose for the world? There are some expositions of Hinduism which say that the world exists because of divine play. Just play. There's no goals, not going anywhere, it's not doing anything. Do they care? Do they not care? Just play. Why should I love someone who's playing? Playing his own game for his own purposes. Why should I love that? So, the love is proportional to knowledge when, of course, the knowledge is of something which generates love. It doesn't mean the more knowledge you have of X, the more love you'll have of X, no matter what X is. But this thing, the creator of the universe, the more you know about the creator of the universe, the more you will love because of your identification, appreciation, and reverence for what he is. So that's one way to explain this idea that you need knowledge for love, and the more knowledge you have, the more love you will have. I think that's an appropriate way to do it. But I just said what I said before because I don't want a person to be misled by this idea of knowledge that the Rambam is simply a philosopher, and he says that the be-all of life is to be a great theologian. There's a vast literature which treats the Rambam that way, and it is all dead wrong. Yeah.
Why doesn't he begin with saying the end goal rather he says that knowledge is the goal that a person should be striving for? Why doesn't he say it should be the end, which is the latest?
I don't know. But it's certainly a necessary step on the way to the end goal. Now here he's talking about maybe I don't know. Now that you asked the question, his point in this chapter is how you should live, what you should do with your actions. How do you guide your actions? And the actions should be guided to one goal. Maybe this goes back to what we were talking about 5 minutes ago. Maybe all you can do is to gain the knowledge. That's all you can do. When you gain the knowledge, the love becomes a natural response, the joy becomes a natural response, and that develops into dveikus naturally. So you can't aim your actions at dveikus. You can only aim, it's just like prophecy. It would be very similar to prophecy now. And this is a new idea for me, so maybe I when I think about it more and discuss it with people, I may modify what I'm saying now. But he does say here, we just read it, that I think a person who's organized his life this way is no less than a prophet, meaning he's no less ideal in his organization of his life than a prophet is. And as I told you, he says explicitly, prophecy is something which, after you organize your life, either God will give it to you or he won't give it to you. There's no guarantee. You don't generate it. You prepare yourself for it. And then the Kodesh Baruch Hu gives it to you or not. So it could be that the progression here is similar in that you aim your actions at knowledge. Knowledge naturally produces love. Knowledge and love naturally produce the joy. And from the joy, the dveikus comes. So that, let me try to put this slightly clearer. So that if I'm giving you a direction what to do, I'm giving you a principle to live by, a principle to make your decisions by, I say, organize all your actions so as to be able to get to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the principle that you should have. Telling you that knowledge will produce love, and knowledge and love produce joy, and knowledge, love, and joy produce dveikus would be an extra piece of philosophical information about the outcome of what's going to happen, but that won't help you organize your life. There's nothing more that you can do when you make decisions than make sure your life is organized to produce knowledge. That's all you can do. So here he's talking about how you should organize your life. Well, the extra element of it, going to dveikus, is just an extra piece of philosophy which explains the ultimate goal that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has, and so forth and so on. Maybe it's just not relevant to the focus of this chapter. That's why he doesn't put it in. I mean, if that's right, then I've had a very good day. Yes?
Yeah.
But we just said that knowledge doesn't necessarily equal dveikus. Meaning a person needs to do some other thing, something else, other than just having knowledge.
Yes, that's true. Okay, good. That's a good observation. I'll modify what I said a little bit. Knowledge is an absolutely necessary condition for dveikus,
Yes.
and after you have the knowledge, and the knowledge leads to love, and the knowledge and love lead to joy, there's something else to do to bring about the dveikus, but you can't do that now because you're not there yet. So all you can do now is organize your life to get to the point of knowledge. That's all you can do. Yeah.
Dveikus, we're understanding, is dveikus the translation connection with God? Is that how it...
Conscious focus and meditation on God. And by the way, my Rebbe says many things. She's a Breslover, and a Chabadski, and a Sephardi, and an Ashkenazi, and a Bas Yeshiva. She's all over the place. But one of the things he says over there is that a necessary condition for achieving this kind of focus on HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being alone, solitude. And you should seek solitude as much as you can. Of course, you have necessary responsibilities, but other than that, you should try to be alone. That's his bodedus. What his bodedus means, being alone, isolating yourself. That's why most of us go out in the middle of the night to the forest, and they meditate on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they sing and they dance, alone, one at a time. Right? And Rashi in the Gemara also mentions this bodedus. So one mustn't think that this was invented 200 years ago. But the Rambam speaks about it quite clearly. Yeah.
It also seems like a good formula in getting to know or connect with a person. If you want to connect with a person, you would also need to gain knowledge of them in order to then do the things for them that would bring you closer and connect more so with them. You couldn't just connect with them just by looking at them or being around them. You would have to...
That's certainly true, but I think the direct point here is more primitive. You can't love someone whom you don't know.
Yes, exactly.
I might even put in also, you probably can't hate someone you don't know.
Yeah, that's very good.
Love and hate require knowledge. When I lived in Baltimore, there was a Rav there who we were very close to, Rav Amram Tal, Zechrono Livracha, and he said once, if you're on the street, you see one person go up, walk up to another person and slap him in the face, they know each other. They know each other. Why was he saying that? Because he lived through the Holocaust, he lost his whole family, and built a new family here, and so on and so on. And he said, those who came out of the Holocaust hating HaKadosh Baruch Hu, rather than being atheists. If you hate someone, you know him. You acknowledge his existence. You just don't like him. That's not the same as being an atheist. They're both problematic, obviously, but it's not the same. It's not the same condition of being an atheist. Anyway, that's what he says. So okay, this is chapter 5. Yeah.
Who are raised hating a certain ethnicity or something, and they only know what they were told by their parents or whatever. That's not valid.
But that means they have what they call information about them. They have an idea of what they are. You can't hate a blank, just like you can't love a blank.
That's not true.
It's corrupted knowledge.
The information that they.
But that doesn't affect my point. My point was you can't hate an unknown. He says, there's Q. Hate it. It just doesn't go. Because if you don't know anything about Q, then nothing generates your hate. Yeah.
Okay, so what do we know, given that we've said a few times that like there isn't much to really know. We know how he acts and how he interacts with certain principles, and like that's what we love.
Well, I mean, this is a good point. And although in a certain level I can't answer it completely, I don't know how to answer it completely, but we do say what you know about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, let me say a little bit here. What you know about HaKadosh Baruch Hu is his actions. This is part 1, chapter 54 in the guide, that what he is in and of himself is something that's unknowable to us while we're alive, as I have said several times. It's knowable, it's just not knowable while you're alive. Kiloni Yirani Ha'adam V'chai. But in the 8th chapter of Hilchos Tshuva, he says explicitly after death he will know. So it's not impossible to know. It's impossible for us to know in our present condition. But then now we're supposed to talk about the love now. So that's what your question is. What can we know? We can know his actions. But as I have pointed out, and this is my thought, I believe it's correct and it answers your question. What is an action? What is an action? Well, it's things that people do. Yeah, it's things that people do. How are actions different from other events? I'll give you a simple example. You see someone trip and fall, trips over something on the floor and falls. Now compare that with an actor who portrays tripping and falling. You look at the two of them, you won't see any difference. He's a good actor. But there's a gigantic difference because the actor chose to portray tripping and falling. And the other guy fell by accident. Well, the guy's falling by accident isn't an action. If somebody asked him, why did you do that? The right answer is, I didn't do that. It happened to me. The thing was on the floor and I tripped over it and I fell. I didn't do it. It just happened. And that's correct. That's the right way to talk. So what's the difference? The difference is that the actor chose what he did. And choices are made for a purpose. All choices are made for a purpose. Suppose you see some body move in a certain way, and you say to him, why did you do that? What was your purpose in doing that? And he says, wrong question. Purpose doesn't apply to what just happened. There's no purpose there at all. Then the conclusion is it wasn't an action. Any action that you do, there's always a for. It was done for. Even if it's not separate from the action. Why are you jumping rope? Because I wanted to jump rope. But there's always a because. Otherwise it isn't an action. So every action has a because built in. So if you tell me that we can know HaKadosh Baruch Hu's actions, it means we can know his purposes. At least some of them. At least the immediate purposes. Because without having a purpose, it's not an action. So if I can know his action, I can know his purposes. Well, if I know what he does, I know something about why he does it, that's enough, I think, to generate love. You don't have to know everything about something to love it. If that were true, no person would love another person because the resources of a person are beyond compassing in your mind. You know enough to love. So if you take the purposes into account, you'll find that you can understand the ability for love to be there.
can an example of that be that you may not know the details of why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something, but if you know that it's for the ultimate good, that's enough to generate the love. You don't know the details, but if it's for the ultimate good, then you can settle on that and generate love from that vagueness of sorts.
I think that's right. In other words, if you know the ultimate purpose, but you don't know exactly how the ultimate purpose applies to the details of the process, that's enough to respond in a way, if you know it's for the sake of benefiting all creatures to the maximum benefit that they can possibly receive, that's enough to generate love. I think that's exactly right. But even if you know a local thing, why was Moses raised in the palace of the Pharaoh? Well, it certainly wasn't a natural event, and Kodesh Baruch Hu definitely has a plan for that. And you can see that he's crafting Moses for some particular job. He's crafting him for some kind of mission that needs to be done. And that's enough also to say, look at the care that he gives. Right, the Rambam talks about in the Gemara, he talks about Kodesh Baruch Hu's care for his creatures. Look at what happens from the moment of conception to the growth of self-sufficiency of a human being, what he has prepared to make it possible for that creature to grow and develop, the 9 months inside the body of the mother, and then breastfeeding, and then the food on the planet, and then language he has to be taught, and all of that is what's necessary for a human being to get standing on his own feet. And certainly not that way for animals. So you see the Kodesh Baruch Hu's commitment, intricacy, subtlety, completeness of the conditions that he set up for this to be able to happen. You get a picture of what he does and the care that's invested in it. Yeah.
You said yesterday that actions you cannot take out motivations from actions. I mean, if somebody goes to carry sandbags, and you can't say that he did it for selfish.
Let me put it in my terms, and then we'll see if the point is still available. I said the consequences of an action aren't necessarily the purpose for which the action was done.
Right.
Yeah.
So by seeing the consequences of seeing Hashem's actions.
Well, maybe your question would be, how could we know the purpose that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in doing an action? If all we see is the action, how can we infer the purpose from it? That's a good question. I think the answer is you can't. We only know his purposes because he told us. If you're looking, even with human beings, very often a person does something and you have no clue why he did it, let alone with the creator of the universe. If he hadn't told us his purposes, we would never know. So I think that's a very important observation. Okay, we are now going to pass on to the 6th chapter, and I'll just set up, we'll see it in the text, set up the problem in the 6th chapter. The way the Rambam sets it up in itself, I think, is quite astonishing. This chapter, he says, that is going to describe the difference between the chassid, the truly pious person, I don't know the Arabic word, that's what it's translated here, and on the other hand, the person who conquers his evil inclination. So what do you say? What? The difference between, the contrast between the truly pious person on the one hand and the person who conquers his evil inclination? Isn't the truly pious person precisely the one who does conquer his evil inclination? What do you mean the contrast between them? Right? So the title here is somewhat mysterious. He says, the philosophers have told us that someone who conquers his rebellious spirit, even though the actions that he does, he does good actions even while desiring evil actions and longing for them, and he conquers his desires and he acts in opposition to the motivations that move him and his strengths, his abilities, and his desires, and the qualities of his soul, and he does the right thing in tsar, in pain of doing them, part of him is saying, you're losing out. You're losing out. Pleasure, power, money, fame, and enjoyment, and so forth and so on. Part of him is saying, you're getting a raw deal, but he chokes that down with strength and forces the right action. That's the person who conquers his spirit. But the truly pious person, the chassid, is someone who follows his motivations and his desires and the qualities of his soul, and he does the good because he desires and longs for the good. His natural motivations, no, not natural, his psychological motivations want the good. They want the true. They want the just. They want the pure. That's the truly pious person. He does the good as he desires to do, and he longs for doing it. And he says the conclusion of the philosophers is that this pious person is far superior and more perfect than the one who conquers his soul, his evil inclination. It's just that person who does conquer his evil inclination, he is similar to a pious person in many things, but still, necessarily, he's on a much lower level because he desires to do evil, even though he doesn't do it. And he's going to say that this idea of the philosophers is echoed by the prophets. So the philosophers and the prophets are on one side in this, and the sages of the Talmud are against it. And there you have a glorious contradiction. But it's not Jews against Goyim, because this side of the contradiction is shared by the philosophers and the prophets. Which means you have an internal contradiction between Jewish sources, and he puts the philosophers in also. So we'll have to understand what the nature of the contradiction is, and they have to ask, why does the Rambam bother mentioning the philosophers? If he's dealing with a contradiction within the Jewish sources, just tell me it's a contradiction of the Jewish sources and solve it. What's the purpose of introducing the philosophers here? Right? Well, that's what we have to work on tomorrow. The Rambam's answer here is really quite, it's challenging, it's deep, and it's somewhat controversial. Yeah.
It may not be the case, but it sounds like he's describing the Beinoni and the Tzaddik with these two groups of categories.
You're absolutely right. I mean, of course, he's only 600 years before Balatanya, but he's definitely talking about the, at least abstractly, the difference between the Beinoni is the person who conquers his spirit and always does the right thing. According to the Balatanya, he always does the right thing, but does so conquering his evil inclination. And the Tzaddik is a person who doesn't conquer; he's fully in tune. But the Rambam's conclusion is going to be utterly different from that of the Balatanya.
Okay.
It's going to be utterly different. It's going to resolve the contradiction by saying, for certain areas of life, the right thing is to be a chassid, and for other areas of life, the right thing, the superior thing, the ideal thing is to be the one who conquers his evil inclination. It's not the philosophers who say that the one who's in tune and he's the truly pious person, they're wrong. Because they say it's always the case. And the other one's going to say it's only 50% the case. Okay, we'll talk about that.